aggressive too, but that's okay. I'm joking. I'm joking. So it's really nice to be talking to you guys today. We were discussing yesterday. We did the same presentation, and I think the guides open the garden up to a whole bunch of people, you know, that don't get those in-depth plant stories. So it's really nice to talk to you about what you guys do. We had some really nice conversations afterwards as well, so hopefully we can have a chat and get to know a few of you guys. But firstly, I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands that we are meeting on today, so the people of the Kulin Nation, and just pay our respects to elders past and present, and acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. So Meg and I are going to talk today primarily about raising rarity, but we're going to put it in context and talk about some of the conservation work that Meg does in Melbourne, and that we do as a horticulture team in Cranbourne. And we've sort of joined forces in the last 4 or 5 years, which has been really exciting, and that's kind of resulted in the Raising Rarity project. So there's obviously 2 gardens, so it's a reasonably big organisation. We've got the Melbourne Gardens that everybody knows, and it's nice to see you guys come down to the Cranbourne Gardens, which are the best. No bias at all, but the Australian Garden at Cranbourne is dedicated purely to the display of native Australian plants. And I'll talk you through the kind of evolution of the collections and how that's translated into real practical conservation work that we're doing behind the scenes. So yeah, initially just a scene set up. Meg's going to talk you through what Rarity is and also the work they do in the Seedbank, and then I'll come back and have a chat about the gardens and the collections. So have most of you guys been to the Cranbourne Gardens before, or is this okay? Oh, beautiful. Well, hopefully you enjoy it. It's a beautiful time of year to come in the midst of spring, so it's looking pretty good out there, even if I do say so myself. All right, so I'll just pass to Meg.
No, that's you. We're going to just go back and forth. Okay, so... We have the lights off just on the screen. Yes. No, No, that's great. I just don't know where they are. But I can start anyway. With raising rarity, before we just need to go back a minute, and we need to kind of understand what rarity is, because it depends on who you talk to, and everybody has a different perception, or it might be a different experience. There's also bias with rarity. So let's think about some of the rare coins you might collect, or matchboxes. I mean, they could be rare, but from an ecological point of view, to skip bias, we consider rarity to really be about a species, its abundance, how much there is, and its distribution, how far it spreads. So we can think about what we would call a widespread species, a common species, might have a very, very wide distribution, and it might have lots of different abundances, as in big populations. So when we think of rarity, we're thinking about contracting that. So either rarity is a very low distribution, so it doesn't occur in many places. It may only occur in one place, but be abundant. And it might occur in many places, but very few. So rarity comes down to how you describe it and how you think about it. But for what Russell and I do, we have to eliminate bias. So for us, rarity, which is an umbrella term for endangered, critical, rare, threatened, it is a listed taxa. It is a listed species, either federally or state, that is under some form of pressure, and Russell will go through that. So with species abundance and distribution, we can go back, and we can go way further than Darwin, but it is something that has been just an intriguing concept. Why does that plant grow there, but it doesn't grow there? Why is there lots here, and then I'll just walk over here to this patch, and it's not here? So you can imagine this really appeals to gardeners as well, because the more we think about all those different facets that come into why an ecosystem works well, and what what is involved in that ecosystem. So for us, knowing about species abundance and distribution is fundamental for understanding how you look out for plants in the wild. Do they occur only in one spot and are abundant? Are they just pocketed around? So this is how you then look at your maintenance and your overall understanding of how plants might perform, where they grow. But, of course, there's the threatening processes. Not Russell, by the way.
So I guess, I mean, you guys probably know all of this stuff, but it's nice to kind of underline this because these are the factors that we take into consideration when we're looking at protecting rare and threatened plant species. So there's obviously key threatening processes. The number one is habitat clearing, and it still remains that even with climate change and increasing fires and floods and all of that sort of stuff. The habitat fragmentation and destruction still remains the number one problem. So, you know, we're working on a locally endangered species, a little Craspedia, which is a little daisy. And if you've known Cranbourne over the last 20, 30 years, you'll understand the urban sprawl and the amount of development that's happened in that time, and it's displaced a lot of these species. So we kind of champion a lot of these local species and try and get it into people's consciousness that these ecosystems are worth saving. And yes, it might look like an old drain, but it's actually a significant swampland in this area, and because it's been so fragmented, changing hydrology, obviously just total fragmentation, you start building these kind of mosaics where there's no connectivity between these plants, which has impacts on genetic diversity and all sorts of stuff. So when we're looking at another key threat, climate change, we want to maintain as much genetic diversity as possible within those populations, and if they're not talking to each other, then they're kind of restricted, and we have to start thinking about translocations and reintroductions and all of that sort of stuff. So climate change obviously is a major problem, and it's probably has been a focus of our work over the last 3 years. So since the 2019 bushfires in the east of the state, which were basically an ecological disaster, the size of the devastation out there was pretty much unseen. So we've been getting out there with a whole bunch of different groups that are managing those lands and trying to build insurance populations. We're genotyping all sorts of populations. We're collecting seed. We're collecting vegetative material. But those plants are at risk because of not only increasing fire frequency. So if you think of, say, an obligate cedar, so a tree that can't reshoot, if a fire comes through, before it has time to set seed. So that it might take some of these big forest trees 15, 20 years to set seed. If a fire continues to sweep through below that kind of 15, 20 year period, you start exhausting the seed bank and the regeneration isn't as much. So we try and look at a lot of those, especially obligate cedar species. And also the intensity of the fire. So there was a lot of species out there that were cooked to a level that they had not been before. And that affects resprouting and that sort of thing. So also, linked to climate change is the flooding. So that's also a problem. And I think one of the major problems with flooding is, especially if it's going through pasture lands, is the distribution of exotic species into these kind of native environments. So you start, you guys have probably heard of the buffer effect. The buffer effect is, so you have a piece of bushland, and then on the edges they become affected by exotic species, and then the more that happens, it starts encroaching, and you change the vegetation structure and all sorts of stuff. So that is a major issue, and also prolonged inundation and that sort of stuff can be a problem for those species. Just on exotic species, this still remains the second greatest threat to plants and animals, really. So Meg and I do a lot of work in the Alps. So this is hawkweed, which is kind of famous in the Alps, and there's a big community movement up there to try and eliminate this species. But this is proliferated through a lot of the alpine regions and starting to displace some of our native species. So the reason we talk about threatening processes is when we decide what plants we want to work on, it's sort of fed through a risk matrix. So yes, they might be rare, but that population might be less inclined to burn or be prone to flooding or less exotic species pressure. And then we we look at a population that we know will probably burn again, or is under pressure from habitat clearing, that sort of stuff, and we prioritise what we're going to collect, like using these kind of or matrices, if that's a word. So we'll just move on. Meg's just going to talk about the work they do in the conservation seed bank. So I'll pass to you.
This is fun. We just keep going back and forth. It's quite good. So with everything that we do, there's support behind us. So part of my day job is working in the Victorian Conservation Seedbank, and that started off with the Millennium Seedbank project, which was through some Tats Lotto, well, I think they call it Tattersalls winnings, and working out a big blue sky project that they wanted to do, and that was, let's preserve 10% of the world's dryland flora. That was in 2005, and now we're looking at up to 20%, up to 25% in some countries. So it really is a major global initiative, and we've been fortunate to be part of that. And also with the Australian Seedbank partnership. So there's seed banks throughout Australia, there's 7, and we're one of them. We're one of the smaller operations, but we get things done. What we do, well, we target rare and threatened Victorian flora. So that's our emphasis, because we're the Victorian Conservation Seed Bank. So that would apply to WA, they would collect only Western Australian species, and the same with New South Wales, where you have a border war, so to speak, where you have species that occur across borders. It really comes down to who gets in there first, or if it's more iconic. So in our situation, we're after the Eucalyptus regnans, so we will collect those because it really has much more of a narrative for the Victorian people than it does for perhaps New South Wales. So that's what we do. These are the steps, and I'm going to show you these steps purely because it applies to everything we do, raising rarity, everything. So, for example, this is Matt Henderson out in the field. So Matt's in the field and he will come back to the lab. When he comes into the lab, he's got all this fresh material. So we need to dry that down, and we can either put it in what you would call like a drying cabinet, but it's a dehumidifying cabinet, so it takes the moisture out of the air, and it gets down to about 15% relative humidity and about 15% Celsius as well. And what that does is it's a twofold process. It increases the shelf life of the seed, so you've got longer to work with it while you're cleaning it. But on top of that, it just starts giving you that time for all the material to dry down. So you're thinking about, this starts in summer where we've got a lot of material coming through. So we put it into this drying cabinet. Then we have to assess the seed. Obviously, that is a huge issue. Seed quality is really our major goal is to collect at least 2,000 seed. When you start talking about rare and threatened species, of course, seed is one of the most limiting factors. So trying to collect seed is like low-hanging fruit. You go for the easy ones first, and then 15 years down the track, we're still collecting, but we're collecting all the really difficult ones. So we come back and we obviously clean after we've dried and assessed the seed. We keep cleaning it down. What we want, because this is for long-term storage, we want to remove all the debris, and we call that live seed. So basically, you can store your seed for long-term. You don't want everything else in there. You want to keep it really nice and clean. And through that weighing, counting, and so forth. X-ray is a great diagnostic tool. This came through the bushfire recovery program where we got some funding. This has changed everything for us, because just think about it. We're working with really rare seed. We don't have a lot. What we used to do in the past, we'd have to actually cut seed open and look at it under the microscope. So it's so destructive. Whereas now we can look at seed and look at the internal, the embryo and so forth, and when it's not a destructive process. So that's been fabulous for us. Then we do a lot of germination testing and growing trials with the Raising Rarity project, with the long-term aim for seed storage. One of the things we need to do then is really assess the recipes. How are these seeds going to germinate? Because if you're going to store them for a long term, whichever one you wish to take, you then really need to understand how is it going to germinate, so the person down the track can actually take it out of the freezer and work out, oh, okay, I'm going to grow this on, this is how I need to germinate it. So having that understanding of how does it germinate is crucial. So seeds are an amazing system. We know that some seed lives in the soil seed bank for a very, very long time, probably because it's got a very hard seed coat. That would be a physical dormancy. So we do different tests to actually assess the status of the seed. So this is, I love putting this in. This is a lovely schematic key that really is representing Australian flora. This was picked up from, this is in the Germplasm Guidelines, which is a free download that we could show it to you if you're interested. And with that, it's just really giving you some great tips on germination techniques and dormancy. That's in chapter 7, but of course there's chapters on living collections, translocation, orchid work, everything. So it's really worth looking at. But the alpine species is what I'm just going to concentrate on now. So we have to look at how we deal with these dormancies, so why these seeds are not germinating even when conditions are ideal for germination. What is holding them back? So we do a fair amount of testing to really get an understanding of how that seed's going to behave. Now, I don't expect you to look at those graphs, but I just kind of want you to see that everything we do, there is research behind it. There is reasoning behind why we say this is a good seed collection and you can use this for, say, raising rarity, or why we may say, no, this is problematic, it's got a complex dormancy, let's not use it, let's go and do some more research on that. And that's where Russell and I will then be applying for grants to get more information on how to germinate something. So that's just the background, the backbone of what I do and what the research behind the seed element of raising rarity. But I'm going to pass over to Russell Lark now.
Thanks, Meg. So I was just going to take you through kind of, I call it the revolution of the Australian garden. We call it a Woodstock type movement. So there was a bunch of passionate horticulturalists that got together, and probably 5 years ago we sat down and really had a conversation about what it was we wanted to stand for as a botanic garden. It is a beautifully designed garden, and initially it was purely about the display of Australian flora, but we wanted to do more and really develop the living collections and make sure that what we were doing was meaningful and potentially contributing to the protection of, you know, Victorian flora, but more widely through the southeast. So it was a bunch of crazy horticulturalists who decided that's what we wanted to do, and it was really quickly embraced by the RBGB. So it's kind of locked away and secured in some of our strategic documents. So the Cranbourne Master Plan, the soon-to-be Cranbourne Living Collections Plan. So it was really embraced, and since then we've done quite a lot of work. And I guess there was two parts to the conversation, the conservation horticulture agenda. The first one was to be able to display those plants within the Australian garden. So we call it our kind of postage stamp collection. So you can come to the garden and learn about, you know, flora from different regions. So we've got flora from the subalps down to the tablelands. We've got flora from warm and cool temperate areas. We've got flora from the Grampians, and for anyone who's going on a tour of the Australian garden this afternoon, you'll see that. You get to go out and have a look, and Matt and Scott will take you around it. And so we've really tried to display those plants. We have a policy, rare and pretty, and you can make it into the garden. So that doesn't mean we don't do work on the ugly species, I was saying the other day, like, you know, we're all plant nuts, so we appreciate any plant, but not everyone does. So there's a stigma sometimes attached to native Australian plants that they're ugly and they're leggy, and you can't look after them properly, and you won't have a nice looking garden. So we like to collect pretty stuff as much as possible. That's really superficial. But in the background, we're still working on some ugly salt bushes and things like that. I wouldn't say that in front of them. And I'm also just going to talk about some of the major conservation projects we've been working on as a team, and that kind of science-hort integration. So this really happened between Meg and I initially, and it's kind of blossomed from there, and it's been really cool So this is the beginning. So there's a whole bunch of people that used to go out on the weekends and all of that sort of stuff, and it's developed into a really targeted fieldwork, fieldwork calendar where we all get out there and we support the science team and also try and build our living collections. This all looks lovely. I put that bottom right in just because people say, oh, well, you're out there enjoying the sunshine, and this was actually a blizzard on the top of Mount William. So it's not all glamorous, but it's still pretty good. I'm not going to lie. So there's kind of two different types of gardens in the Australian garden. So there's the display gardens, which are purely dedicated to getting people engaged in horticulture and using native Australian plants at home. So there's a whole bunch of gardens out there in a kind of urban context to give people ideas of what they can do in their own gardens. So we felt like the other type of gardens, so we kind of loosely call them the nature gardens, are a real opportunity to start displaying some of this southeast Australian flora. So this is predominantly on the western side of the garden, so the eucalyptus walk, and we also have House and Hill, which is our mallee collection. But it made sense. These were designed initially to kind of evoke the spirit of the Australian bush, and it's been a pretty smooth transition, really. So as I say, it's been the last kind of 5 or 6 years, and this is a really nice slide, and this has actually increased since I put this together, but you can see the amount of ground that we've covered in the last 5 or 6 years. It's unbelievable. So we've collected over 1,100 species, over a third of them are rare and threatened, so that also shows you how many rare and threatened plant species are out there needing some love. And I think it's really become the conservation horticulture is still not quite mainstreamed. In many cases there's horticulture and there's science and there's not much in between, but horticulture can provide services to conservation that many of the scientific organisations cannot. And so we do a lot of work to support the Victorian Conservation Seedbank. So if you think about the fires, there's a whole bunch of plants that aren't going to set seed for 4, 5, 10, 15 years, and they are the species we're bringing in here. We're starting to build genotyped representative individuals from those populations, and we're holding them. So initially as insurance populations, just in case another fire comes through and that seed bank starts to get exhausted, but also as material for translocations or reintroductions, and we're doing a lot of work with regional land managers, both private and public, to you can't do this in isolation. You need an army of people to be able to do this, and I think that's also something that's valuable about the seed bank. If they are insurance populations, but if we can actually use some of that seed and get it back out there and they start creating their own seed, that's the best outcome, really. Meg put these slides in the other day. So this is just a couple examples. Yeah. So this is Grevillea stoglitziana. This is an endemic Brisbane Ranger species. Like Meg was saying, this is a really restricted distribution. It's pretty abundant, but it's very restricted, so at risk from fires and that sort of stuff. So you can see that in the ironbark garden. This is Grevillea alpina. So this is not a rare species, but it's a really rare form. So that's something else we do when we go out into the field, look at interesting forms that potentially could be brought into cultivation. There's a really, we actually just found a pure yellow, so you can see there with the pollen presenter, it's green and red. We found a pure yellow the other day in the Grampians, which is pretty exciting. So, I mean, for me that's exciting. It might not be exciting for other people, but we were freaking out. We're like, wow. Yeah. I mean, we're all plant nerds. This hopefully is a safe space. Yeah. Grevillea levantulacea. So again, there's multiple forms of this, and Grevillea aquifolium. So this is a predominantly like Western Grampian species. This whole kind of holly Grevillea group is probably the most speciose group of Grevilleas in Victoria. So we've done a whole bunch of work on other things, Grevillea montiscole and microsthesia, and these really rare and threatened holly Grevilleas. And then, look, I touched on this before, but the bushfire recovery project really has been the main focus, just because of the extent of those fires. And I think we're doing a lot of work at the moment with not only the seed bank, but the conservation genetics team. So the samples that we're taking, we're growing, so we have genotype specimens in our collection, and we're really looking at building up that genetic diversity and working with Friends of Malakuta, the Muji, the traditional owners down there, CMA, the department. We've got Land for Wildlife, we've got Threatened Species Conservancy, Trust for Nature. So we're actually building literally an army of people down there who are doing some amazing work. So that's been a huge focus, and we're going to continue doing that in the next couple of years. Flood recovery project. I put this in because it's a really nice story. So Eucalyptus ordans is found on the Avon River in West Gippsland, and it was reported that there was only 7 individuals left in the wild. So we got the team out there, and we surveyed, and we've found about 1,000 so far. We've done a lot of population genetics work on it, and it's just a good story, you know. I think sometimes we get overwhelmed by, you know, the threats, and you know, we think, I was about to say we're all going to die, but we're it's probably a bit extreme. But you know, sometimes you need those stories of hope, and it just shows you, like with a bunch of people getting out there and surveying, like there's still so much work to be done out there, and there's still many good stories. I mean, on top of that, we were out in the Grampians a couple of weeks ago and found an endemic, critically endangered grevillea that hasn't been seen at that site for 25 years. Mass germination event after the unseasonal rains, so Grevillea garroidensis. So that was pretty exciting, and we're working to get that fenced and working with the department. Raising Rarity project we're going to talk about, and the Care for the Rare project. So this is mainly the GANS and manager of horticulture, John Arnott. This is his project. I can't take credit for this one. But it's a really nice project. So it's about getting regional botanic gardens displaying their local rare and threatened flora in their gardens, and trying to build awareness for the locals. So that's pretty cool. I've sort of talked about that already. And I guess, look, we're going to continue to do this, and we're getting better at it. So that integration between science and art, we're all sitting down at the same table now, which is amazing, and we're all planning together. And I think, you know, hopefully we can start to build, you know, a specialised conservation horticulture team, just to, because this is additional to the work we do. You know, we still have to present a beautiful garden and that sort of stuff. So it'd be really nice to have some dedicated resources. And I think, look, in the future, the Gardens is pretty keen to continue all of this work. And the other thing is that, like, building those, I'm calling them conservation hubs, it needs a rebrand, but building little regional hubs where all of the partners are together. So interestingly, you know, out east there was 3 or 4 groups working on the same species. You know, we can support them with our conservation genetics work to inform their collection and growing and all of that sort of stuff. And also there's a whole bunch of threatened species on private land. So there's a few species we're working on down there that aren't publicly managed, but the locals are really passionate about saving those species. So I think, and also they know where these things are. You know, we go out, you know, 2, 3, 5 times a year. These guys live out there, so they know, you know, their little, you know, critically endangered species and that sort of stuff. So that's going to be a real focus for us in the next couple of years. So I'll hand to Meg.
So that brings us to raising rarity. So what Russell's been talking about through the conservation horticulture and all the different work we do through the Seedbank, population genetics, we start thinking about this kind of idea of an umbrella term, and that's what we're looking at with raising rarity. It's going to encompass a lot. It is an integrated approach, so I just want you to keep thinking about it as an integrated approach. So what we do, first of all, with our species, everything we work on is federally or state listed, again looking at that rare and threatened status. Then we are also looking at how the horticulture, the conservation horticulture, which is a science, anyone that tells you horticulture is not a science, you just have to tell them to just go and read about it, what horticulture does, and also conservation horticulture, what it actually embraces. And there is pure science in there, so I just need to say that. Also we have a big backbone with the conservation horticulture. We also, through Raising Rarity, are looking at education and outreach. And the reason we really need to stop here and think about it is because we keep talking about the extinction of species. But we need to talk about this hidden problem, which is the extinction of experience. We've got youth coming up who are less involved, less interaction, less connectivity with nature. COVID didn't help. Okay, we all had our indoor plants, but it didn't help. What we need to do is actually embrace botanic knowledge, embrace what we need to almost call plant blindness. And that is what we're all suffering from through a kind of almost, and I hate saying this, dumbing down of our ecological awareness. So plant blindness, the inability to see the plants within your own environment, that is a big problem. The other problem is this extinction of experience. The less we connect, the less we will act for nature. So we start putting that together, less botanical knowledge in school curriculums, we're already removed somewhat, and we're not dealing with or touching or having anything to do with rare plants. Somehow rare plants have been put in this box that you can't touch them, you can't grow them, you can't cultivate them. So that's a big issue for us that we're talking about. And then of course the final part is raising revenue. This is what Russell and I do. We are constantly trying to raise awareness, but also raise revenue so money goes back into all the projects that we work on, out in the field or in the lab or out in the gardens. And so together, this is that integrated approach where we're looking at species selection, species that are in need. We're looking at how we approach it through a conservation horticultural approach. And so there's a big backbone in science there, and through education and research, and then of course, how can we present that to raise revenue? So this is just a quick back part of how the science supports what we do. My PhD was dealing a lot with exploring rarity and exploring how you can cultivate rare and threatened species. Then through conversations with Russell, we have really started thinking that no, this is bigger than just cultivating. This is actually an integrated approach where we can bring in different people and different organisations to act for the plants. I know that sounds kind of act for the plants, but again, this is something that we all need to do because the funding is so limited. So species selection, we started with a pilot project. This is building and building. We started with species that were easy to propagate and easy to work with. We're now starting to look at those that are a little bit harder. We've got seed orcharding, so what that means is we try and grow to supplement seed collections. We started with a beautiful Craspedia where there was only 60 seed in the seed bank. So we've now got hundreds of seed through our seed orcharding program. So we're really trying to build, but what we need to do is we need to constantly be aware of the genetic potential within our living collections, what we're collecting, and retaining it. So we have to retain variation. Russell was talking about that beautiful yellow form in the grevillea. We need to keep and retain all variation because that is what is so important about genetic diversity. If we start contracting and we start losing things, our diversity goes down, our pollinators go down, so it's all tied in. So that's how we see raising rarity. This is kind of our framework. And then this is kind of the way where we kind of talk about it, that ultimately it's about engaging the public. Because with that, it's all about the power of people with the power of plants. And that's where we're coming from. It's a very strong mantra and trying to bring in as many groups as we can. And this slide we've just done, so I'll just do it again. I don't know why I've put that in twice. So we also have the research plots where we do all our work out for our field trials. We also have nursery trials and in the incubators in the labs. So, and there's some beautiful signage now. It's really, and that's through grants. And then here's some rarities, and you should come in and throw in some of your wisdom on these, Russell.
Yeah, you skipped past this.
Yeah, I know.
I was like, oh no, our babies.
Yeah.
So the species, the red grevillea, is Grevillea dimorpha. So that's become kind of a kind of mascot for raising rarity. So it's on our new banner.
Yes.
But this is a really interesting species, endemic to the Grampians. They call it dimorpha, which means two forms, but there's actually probably about 10, 12, 15 forms of this. So we're trialling a whole bunch of different forms. So if you get a chance, go out into the research plots and have a look. There's a whole bunch of different flower sizes and leaf sizes, and we're just trialling it to see which one might lend itself to cultivation. We've got Boronia latipina, that's also another Grampians endemic, the pink one, which is super pretty. And look, it seems to be relatively easy to propagate and really floriferous as well. So when it's in flower, the whole bush is covered. Illyria tomentosa, so that plant doesn't do it justice, but these daisies are absolutely massive. And people love daisies. You know, I think what we've found is people love daisies and people love grevilleas. They're the two things that kind of fly off the shelf. So we had a plant sale on Saturday and Sunday, and people were wrestling to get their daisies and grevilleas, which is pretty fun. So they sold out pretty quickly. And then Pristanthera monticola. So this is an alpine species, a really rare species. That photo doesn't do it justice. It's got really green, glossy foliage, and there's kind of purpley white flowers, which are really cool. And I guess one of the things with these Pristanthers is it brings like all your birds in. So there's tube-like flowers, so correas and things like that. We kind of sell them as like pollinator attractants in a way. But yeah, I mean, we could have had 30 different slides for all of the different species, but yeah, there are a couple we're working on at the moment and proving to be pretty successful. So I'll.
And then we've got Brachyscome tagellii. This is from the Bogong High Plains. So you can see just on species abundance and distribution again. From our distribution map here, we can see that it doesn't have a lot of localities, yet where it grows, it's abundant. So it is a really specialised habitat. This is where we sort of start thinking, okay, it's got specialised habitat. We couldn't grow it down here. So we've been working with this species now for, I'd say, 5 years. So we've had a lot of generation movement, and it really is working as a terrific cultivated plant. So this is a real success for us. It's reliable, and of course we're retaining all the variation because we're propagating it by seed, not by cuttings. The next one is Rutedosis leptorhynchoides, and this is where Matthew Henderson, who is our awesome conservation horticulturalist, comes into the fore. In the wild, Rutedosis doesn't really, it's a bit scraggly and it looks sort of a bit ordinary, but by applying cultivation and cultivated methods, so pruning and looking at how you can change form, Matthew has got this plant where he can get the secondary growth, and he can basically make the plant just look, it's got two forms, and he can just keep cutting it back, so we keep the foliage that we really like, which is the beautiful linear leaves that come up, and it's really attractive. So we're seeing just how you can start taking these very rare species and applying horticultural approaches just as you would in amenity horticulture. So again, a real win. We do a lot of work on this species. Again, this is a federally listed species, and we work with Glenelg Hopkins on a regular basis, actually monitoring the in situ, the in-ground populations. Just Lobelia gelida, I always have to just quickly put this in because, again, it only occurs in 2 locations. It is in a very pristine area. It is really hard to collect seed, so we've been seed orcharding it, and it is on the brink. We do not want this one to go under our watch. So Whether it is of horticultural value to people to grow, we are growing it anyway. It has the most wonderful cascading effect. It would look great in a hanging basket, but of course it dies back in winter. So we've got to work out how you actually get that message that some things behave differently and you've just got to deal with it. That's my selling approach. The Craspedia caninus, this always sells out. This is the Love Your Local. This grows here. It is a beautiful Craspedia. It is the grey billy buttons because the leaves have a beautiful grey form. Seeds prolifically. This was one that only had 60 seed in the seed bank. Again, these can go under our watch if we're not careful. We think Australasian because, you know, any like daisies, that their dispersal mechanism's so fabulous. But when you're under pressure, seed is limiting and reproduction can decline. So we've always got to remember that things can go under our watch even if we don't think that it's possible. I know we were talking about education and engagement. So this is our pin-up plant, the Xerochrysalum palustra. Again, this is the swamp daisy. It is a specialised habitat. The common name basically tells you that. It really needs to have water, but the beauty on this species is how easy it is to work with. So I just want you to picture a group of school kids, and the ones that we had, they're very well-behaved school kids. They were lovely school kids, but let's just think about, you know, the school kids with their bags and they're awkward. And we got them working with this beautiful rare plant. We did a workshop. They looked at it under the microscope. They really got an understanding of this rare species, and they cultivated it. They're growing it now at their school. So we went out to their school and planted it. So this is the middle school. And what they're doing is they're taking ownership. So they're now custodians of this rare Xerochrysalum palustra. From that, we've also now grown and we're putting them in their junior school. So this is our pilot school, and they're our guinea pigs, and the kids love that. They love that they're the first ones that are going to actually be running with this. Russell and I are hoping to roll this out into schools, because again, if we can get kids touching plant material, be custodians, you are making a difference. Someone's going to, of that group, statistically speaking, some of them have to remain, surely. So what we do, we have to drill the science in, so they will also record all the information that we want. As we say to them, just on the back of that plant label, you know, full sun, half sun, 12 weeks to flowering, where does that information come from? You're going to get it for us, because we don't know. So they're monitoring, they're going to collect the seed, and they're going to give it back to us. They're going to come into the lab, they're going to do viability testing, and they're going to keep some seed too. So I think that's an absolutely wonderful way to raise Rarity by getting our youth involved. So now I'm going to pass it over to Russell, because this is also probably one of the biggest parts that we realise we really need to do to get project support.
Thanks, Meg. So I guess probably the key thing for us is about raising awareness of Victorian threatened species. That's kind of the main objective for this project, and there's different ways to do that. So you know, our plant sales and all of that sort of stuff is to allow people to, you know, touch them and feel them and take them home. I always say you can't take an orangutan home, but you can take home a little daisy, you know. So hopefully, you know, it engages people a little bit more on a slightly different level. We were chatting the other day. There's a school around Mount Borbor, and their kids have been working on the Borbor frog, but they've never seen one. They've never been out to the habitat where they survive. So they're working on this, but there's still a level of disconnection. So just to reinforce what Meg was saying with the school, to see those kids get dirty and do pH testing and collect seed and that sort of stuff is amazing, and a whole different kind of level of engagement. But we haven't just gone to schools, we've done a whole bunch of stuff. So Meg and I are relentless. We just knock on people's door until they say, yes, we'd love to hear your story, thank you. I think they just do it because they want to get rid of us, to be honest. But so you can see here, Meg went to the Victorian Science Week at Parliament House, which is a real success, and talked about the Raising Rarity project. Plants Grow Here is probably the leading botanical podcast in Australia. We were working at the Victorian Nature Festival. We've released a whole blog series with one of our local artists, so someone who's part of the Botanical Illustrators for the Friends of Cranbourne is super active in this space. So she's done a lot of stuff with Remember the Wild, but we just met organically on a National Eucalypt Day tour, and she wanted to get involved and help us spread the message, which was really cool. So that's been amazing. And you can see the second from the top right, that's you probably recognise the man in the middle, Costa. So this was at an International Botanic Gardens Congress where Meg and I presented about conservation horticulture and the work we're doing on raising rarity. And then we've had a whole bunch of kind of special interest groups. So, we've had the Alpine Garden Society who have been really supportive of this program and given us some funds. We've had local field nats. We've had the department, and it seems to capture people's imagination. And when, we've got a lot of pilot studies going. We call them pilots because if it falls over, it's just a pilot. So we've got about 72 pilots going at the moment. But some of these pilots are actually working really well. And today it's one school, but, hopefully in 5 years it could be 25 schools and then 100 schools and then the world. That's kind of how we think about this stuff. So might be too blue sky, might need some help. But I think it's nice to connect with as many people as possible. I think there's some really interesting projects going on all over the country. So it's been fun releasing a lot of this content and talking to a lot of people. And the thing, these conversations, I mean, you guys would have them in the gardens, but they breed other conversations and they breed opportunities. If you talk about this stuff, you find out that, I'm sure some of you guys are involved in this stuff, and we meet, just punters who want to get involved and that sort of stuff. So even the conversations we had on Saturday and Sunday about these plants and where they come from, and there's a level of engagement that we probably haven't seen with a lot of our other projects, and we're actually getting a different demographic. So for the plant sales and the tours we've done for Raising Rarity, we're getting a lot of younger guys as well. So we've got like the hardcore plant nuts, who just want to come and buy plants, but we're getting people from universities and early 20s, early 30s, and we weren't capturing that demographic. So I'm not sure what it is about the Raising Rarity project, but it seems to be kind of contagious in a good way. So look, the last thing we just wanted to touch on is this really has been a passion project from the beginning, but we're having conversations with around sort of commercialisation of this project, and really we want to roll this out to as many people as possible and raise as many funds as we can for the conservation work that we do. This is our kind of shop front to all of the work we do behind the scenes. So science and conservation isn't as well funded as the footy or the Commonwealth Games or whatever. So you do have to find ways to make money, and this is part of this project. So we're having conversations with like commercial partners about how we potentially can release this. And I think, look, we've had quite a few. We're getting closer to locking in an agreement, and the thing that Meg and I were really strong on was we wanted to retain the message. So some people just wanted to sell plants and make money, but we wanted to find someone who was invested in the story and be able to kind of retain that brand when we're trying to sell plants. So that was really important.
That's just the framework.
Cool. And
in case you didn't get it.
This is what happened to me yesterday.
Yeah. It'll catch up. It just goes a bit slow, but it will catch up.
So, and look, the other thing I wanted to say, there's a slide really about all of the. Here we go.
Almost.
Yep.
It's almost.
Nelly. Just about all of the people who've been involved.
It's not ready to leave you. Like it.
And this is fun, isn't it?
Hey.
There we go. Yeah, so look, there's a whole bunch of people that have reached out, from schools to local community groups to, Vanda, who's a scientist. We've had the FAME, which are work on endangered species. They've been really really supportive and have funded this project as well. So, and this has happened through people reaching out and really wanting to get involved. When we presented at the Congress, there was a whole bunch of other gardens around Australia that thought it was a really nice idea and potentially want to get involved under the same umbrella. So hopefully it just grows and grows and becomes a sort of self-perpetuating vehicle, you know. That's the plan. So anyway, I just wanted to say thanks for listening. It's really nice to be able to talk to the people who kind of spread the word. You know, I think we try to do a lot of work with Jackie. I'm sure you all know Jackie, but Jackie's really instrumental in getting us together with our guides and you know, our garden ambassadors and our friends to be able to tell this story, because you guys are the shop front. You know, you guys are the ones who sell that message, and we're just kind of head down weeding and, you know, don't get a chance to do that. So
90%
anyway,
horticulture.
yeah, exactly. So yeah, thanks for listening. I hope you enjoy the Cranbourne Gardens, especially for the people who haven't been here before, and jump on the tour this afternoon. It should be good. Yeah. Yeah.
So, very good fun talk. Always good fun talk with Russell. And Mick. Lovely. Thank you very much for talking to us all. We're hoping we're getting the messages out there. And so
Yeah, definitely. Oh, that's very fun.
Thank you. Thank you.
thank you for your work.
Beautiful. Any questions?
What about native bees? Any project on native bees on the Florida pollination?
Yeah, so we're lining up with the Pollination Corridor project. So with the bees, what we're doing is, because we do have we have generalist pollinators, we're trying to get them into corridors where we know that there will be safe passage. So there's one at the moment, which is the Melbourne Pollination Corridor. So it's going to go from Westgate Bridge all the way to the Royal Botanic Gardens, Melbourne. And because when you think about the flight, the gardens themselves have to be within a short distance of each other, so having that connectivity. So we're being involved in that by putting our plants in as well. So there's always, and of course with pollination being like the primary key and driver, it is something that we are always aware of, that what we're growing are really good pollinators, are able to hold pollinators. Yeah.
And there's another project as well, the Gardens for Wildlife project. So there's a whole bunch of information on species that you can plant in your home garden, and they'll be specific to whether you want to attract birds or whether you want to attract a certain type of bee, you know, blue bandeds or whatever it might be. So that's another project that a couple of guys here, Ricardo, who runs our natural resources team, has been a huge advocate for it, and he's been rolling that out across a whole bunch of councils. So now councils can sign up for Gardens for Wildlife, and you get a whole booklet of information, and they'll come out and consult and look at your garden and explain, you know, what might be a locally threatened pollinator species or something like that. So that's pretty cool. And also, yeah. Yeah, they're really cool days. And look, for me personally, I've just redone my garden about a year ago. And I mean, I'm a massive nerd, so I've got a camera that I set up before I dug out all of my lawn, and it just sits there and picks up different birds and different pollinators and all that sort of stuff. And within a year, it's really about species diversity and you know, species selection. But within a year, I've had blue banded bees in, a whole bunch of hoverflies I've never seen before, a whole bunch of beetles I've never seen before. It's starting to build a bit of structure, so I'm getting different birds, not just the kind of dominant wattle birds and that sort of stuff. So yeah, look, for us at the Gardens, it's really about connecting people to Gardens for Wildlife and the Melbourne Pollinator Corridor. So it's not something we specifically do, but we facilitate.
Yeah.
We facilitate it. Yeah.
But it is so important, because we now know, just with the changing of temperatures, there's a disjunct between flowering time and pollinator availability. So we already know we're in a sort of a perilous situation, and so just knowing about and talking to people who are in pollinating projects or pollination projects is something that we're always a part of, because it's instrumental. It really is.